Welcome to 3Ps on a Pod, the PSHA podcast where you get to hear from the current, past, and future presidents of the Pennsylvania Speech, Language, and Hearing Association. I am Nicole Billak, the current president of PSHA.
Hi everyone, I'm Craig Coleman, president-elect of PSHA. On this podcast, we'll bring you conversations about the challenges and opportunities in our field, highlight important updates, and share ideas that help professionals stay informed, connected, and supported.
And I'm Erin Buckwater, past president of PSHA. We'll also be talking with colleagues, leaders, and experts from across the state and beyond to share insights, experiences, and practical information that matters to our community. Let's get started.
Welcome back to 3Ps on a Pod, the PSHA podcast. I'm Nicole Billak, president of the Pennsylvania Speech, Language, Hearing Association, and today we're talking about a topic that has generated a lot of questions from school-based SLPs, the new certification pathway between the Educational Specialist Certificate and the Instructional I certificate. To help explain it, I'm joined by Dr. Dana Bitetti, PSHA past president, and our current vice president of public information. Dana, thanks for joining us.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. I'm very excited to be here. I think I'm your first guest on 3Ps.
You are my first guest, okay. Yes.
So I'm very honored to be that as a past president, current board member, been on the board for a while. And this was an issue that had, since I had been on the board, I think in 2019, had been coming up. So I'm really excited to talk about, because this is something that PSHA had been working on for several years, and it's great to finally have this pathway available for clinicians so that they can essentially get the certification that works for them and then move forward in the career pathways that they are interested in. And I just wanted to, while I'm here, I'm speaking for the pathway, but I have to give credit to all the people who worked on the task force, and also to the Bureau of School Leadership and Teacher Quality at the Pennsylvania Department of Education for working with us on this. So.
Absolutely. So let's start with a little bit more background. PSHA has actually had a task force that was made up of higher education faculty and school-based speech language pathologists. And we worked very closely with the Pennsylvania Department of Education, which we're going to refer to probably as PDE throughout this, to make sure this pathway was seamless and offered a lot more opportunities. And so after several years of collaboration and discussion, the pathway was officially approved in early 2025.
Yep. Yeah. So I would say we began I'll give a little bit of background on the two certifications, just for people joining us who may be new to Pennsylvania, maybe you're new to the schools or just the whole certification issue. So just in terms of the background, and I'll do like a condensed version if anybody out there in the audience wants to give a longer version, please do, but for the purposes of time. So the educational specialist certification, so basically PA is unique that we have two school certifications. And the educational specialist certification really did years ago fill an important gap in allowing more SLPs to move into Pennsylvania schools. However, then with the two school certifications, Ed Specialist and Instructional, there are just some differences in then pathways forward in terms of adding on additional certifications through the Pennsylvania Department of Education. So that's where we were hearing some issues from school SLPs out in the field who then, depending on the certification they had difficulty adding on additional desired certifications. One of them being the supervisor certification. And we definitely want more SLPs in those leadership positions.
We do make good leaders.
Absolutely. So that's just a little condensed background version. So with the task force, one of the things too that was really important to the PDE was that it's not just higher ed people, but that we also have those school-based SLPs representing LEAs to not only make the pathway, but what we had to do to actually make the pathway was have the competencies reopened. So during that time, we also updated the requirements of what programs, speech language pathology programs like mine, or what we call the EPP, the educator preparation program, what we're required to prepare students to do out in the field. So we're not changing scope of practice or anything that school-based SLPs are required to do, but what are programs required to do to produce good SLPs. So we also updated those competencies as well. So that was all reopened. And once those were open for editing, then we could make the pathway. So what we were really asking for was just something that was transparent, that was in the competencies that people could actually go and look at to have that pathway. And I can show those. I can share my screen in a bit. So what this means for SLPs is there's now a formal way for individuals who hold the school speech and language pathologist pre-K through 12 educational specialist certificate to move to the speech language impaired pre-K through 12 instructional certificate, and then vice versa, so that it's pathways between, not one to the other.
That's awesome. And because certification can be confusing, one of the first things we always recommend is to check PDE's frequently asked questions page for the most up-to-date information. Dana, can you show us how to get there?
Sure. And I just do want to emphasize that for clinicians, we really wanted to create this additional flexibility depending on your professional goals and the district requirements. So I will show how to get there through our PSHA committee resources. All right, so here on our PSHA web page, we have a committee page. So if you go here to About PSHA, and then you go to our committees, just a plug here for all our committees as I scroll down to, I guess. So with the Higher Education Committee, we also made a resource link for kind of like frequently needed program links, things that I, as a program director, links I was always calling up in terms of policy and regulations. So it's down here at the bottom, and it just takes you to this Google Doc that we made. That's all of these frequently needed links. Keep in mind, these are not PSHA links, but it's just a pooled resource of information for you. So then from there, you can go to PDE's SLP frequently asked questions link, and I can show that over here. So because there was a lot of questions, PDE did put these in place to discuss the two different certification pathways and how to get either. I know sometimes this still is a lot of information. So if you ever do have questions, PSHA can be a great resource, the schools committee and the higher ed committee. However, sometimes we also do send you to PDE to ask your question, just because we, again, just always a reminder, we don't regulate any of those practices. We are just a conduit for that information. So, but a great resource here. And then also in these program links, just to show again the framework. So those are the competencies that were open. So we have the framework here for the instructional, and then the framework here for the educational specialist certificate. And then within those, it's a lot here. I got a lot going on, a lot of tabs, but that's not like unique for me.
Well, we all multitask, Dana.
So over here, then you can click. So again, just to emphasize, these were the competencies that educational preparation programs will need to prepare their students to meet. So we have the one here for the instructional. And then if you scroll down, we have the how to add the educational specialist. And then we also have the alternate pathway for ed specialist to instructional. And then that is also, this one is for the ed specialist competency. And so those are also here in those frameworks. And we also did ensure that within the thank yous that PSHA did get a thank you within those. So, but if you ever have to access those, definitely check out our PSHA website too. So.
Very cool. And now with this pathway, we don't all necessarily need to start all over again and go back to school and do everything, right? In some cases, there might be some or all of your requirements have already been met.
Yeah, so I can't necessarily speak to every unique, I feel like every time we get a question, everybody's situation can be very unique. But if you do have questions, sometimes we're a good place to start in terms of getting started. And then we can also sometimes we can contact PDE. Like sometimes if we get enough questions, we can contact PDE on sort of behalf of our membership. So as Nicole was saying, if you want to move, particularly from ed specialist to instructional, the first step would really be working with your educator preparation program. So you may have already taken a school-based course if your program was approved to issue, or like your program's approved to be for students who graduate to get ed specialist or instructional.
Okay.
So the first step would be checking with if you happen to have ed specialist, check with your EPP, that's your graduate program, contact your program director. That's kind of your first step to determine, do you have the requirements for the instructional? So they would review your coursework and then determine whether you already meet the requirements for the instructional certification, or if there was any additional courses that you would need. So for example, with my program, many students have already had our school-based course, but they may have gotten ed specialist. So essentially they would then apply in the TIMS system, which we currently still have TIMS, but in a few years we may have to edit this. But you would then apply in the TIMS system for your instructional. Your program director would then go in and approve that you have the correct coursework, that you have the form filled out, and you'll also need to take the additional praxis for the foundational concepts. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but you'll need that additional praxis test.
Awesome. Well, we get a lot of questions about PDE 430 form and how that needs to be signed and taken into consideration. We require a signature on that, correct, Dana?
Yeah, so in some cases, if you don't have perhaps that form done, or if you didn't have the school-based course in Pennsylvania, so for example, if your graduate program did include that, and it's aligned with the PD requirements, you could already be eligible and you have that 430 form. In other situations, you may need to identify a course that you need to take to complete that would address the competencies required on the PDE 430 form. It's part of that documentation. So we are working now, one of the things is the programs that can offer ed specialist. Can we find ways forward for people to come back and take that course within our departments?
Okay, awesome. And so another detail we have involves people who already have the Educational Specialist 2 certificate and why they have to go into becoming an Instructional 1 first. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so we did this is something we talked to PDE about. This was something that they worked with their legal team and things like that. So it's not something that I think PSHA can to speak to exactly. We're definitely continuing to work with PDE on this issue. But the situation was, if somebody had achieved ed specialist 2, they will automatically receive an Instructional 1 certificate. This is under the current regulations and policies. So it's important to check with your employer, your HR department, and PDE before making any changes to ensure that everything aligns with district policy. So we know a lot of people who already have Ed Specialist 2 want to move to Instructional 2. And so that's an issue we're continuing to work on with PDE as to how people can do this if they've already met the level 2 for their cert, going from the level 2 to the other certification. So I think what's important to think about for people who hold Ed Specialist, and if you're at Ed Specialist 1 and you're thinking about moving to Instructional, we recommend, we are saying now perhaps to try to, I know there's a lot of people, believe me, I know there's a lot of people out there with Ed Specialist 2, but we're trying now just thinking about that, just kind of thinking about your future goals. If you are thinking about moving to the Instructional or you're holding that addition, basically you don't move to it, you now just hold almost both certifications, to think about potentially moving when you can versus so that you would go from Ed Specialist 1 to Instructional 1, and then you could get Instructional 2. So just something that we are aware of, that it's an issue. PSHA is continuing to monitor, to work with PDE, but just thinking about your personal goals and your district requirements.
Absolutely. And so it sounds really more like we need to make sure that we contact PDE and your school HR department before you move forward in that process, because there are a lot of HR departments that'll kind of just move you into from 1 to 2, depending on what you've, the experience that you've had in your district. So absolutely makes sense. And so if you have any other questions or issues related to the certification pathway, please reach out to PSHA. We can continue to support clinicians across the state. Dana, thank you so much for walking us through that.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. Again, like I can't stress this enough, please contact us with issues. We take them very seriously. And the thing is, the more sometimes we hear from clinicians, then we're able to really pull all of those united voices together to advocate moving forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dana. And that wraps up this segment of 3 Ps on a Pod. Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more updates, advocacy news, and resources for speech-language pathologists and audiologists across Pennsylvania. See you later.
Bye-bye.